The channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I am Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
Tonight, we're going bird watching. That's what these binoculars are for. Yeah, that's the ticket. We're watching a pair of Alfred Hitchcock movies that we haven't already discussed: Rear Window and The Birds. Um,
Yes.
Now, it's interesting to be going back to Hitchcock just because of all of the filmmakers that we have discussed on the podcast already. We've probably talked more Hitchcock movies than any other director, simply because he had three movies that were already on the original list, and now, and then we subsequently did. Um, uh, Shoot, now I'm suddenly second guessing myself of other ones that we did, but we're certainly doing these two. Didn't we do like Notorious as well?
Notor is Notorious isn't on the list.
Not on the AFI list, no.
Then yeah, we did that, and I
Mm.
think maybe Strangers on a
Strangers
Train.
on a Train is certainly one of my favorites. I can't remember if we talked about it. I'm pulling up the list, which is long enough now that it's not easy to actually just like scan down the list and be sure that you've caught it. Um, um, but wow, what is it? Okay. Yeah, it's Google Sheets is not easily. It's it's doing something very strange. Like I'm trying to just say find in document, and it pulled up like there we go. It pulled up like this weird like spelling correcting thing, and then it started trying to do a spell check on a different tab than I was on.
Interesting.
Yes, we did Notorious, but not Strangers on a Train. But that
Okay.
still means that we have, before tonight, already done 4 Hitchcock movies, and now we're doing 2 more. And I think probably Spielberg would be next, like if in terms of how many of his we've talked about.
Yep.
But in any case, though, Rear Window and The Birds. Rear Window is an interesting one for me, just personally. And it's a connection between the two of us because my first viewing of that movie was at your house when we were kids.
Oh yeah.
And I think of it actually as being the first point in my life where I remember thinking or realizing that old movies could be cool.
They can be cool.
Yes, it's true. But I guess I had just had in my head old movies, those are boring. But we watched Rear Window and I thought it was great. I thought it was really funny and liked it. And so I feel like that was actually a bit of a watershed moment for me as a film buff. I don't
That's
remember if
pretty
you
cool.
had actually watched it already or not, but
I had. I think I was. I think I recommended it to you
hmm,
as like, oh hey, like
we
I
should
like.
watch this.
We should watch this. I would
Yeah.
like to watch this again, and I think you would enjoy it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in any case, um, it was a movie that he made in. I had his
54.
1954. So this was certainly not one of his earliest films, but it was early in the phase that is kind of considered his peak period, right? So,
Yep.
if you look at his Wikipedia page, what it calls as his peak years is 1954 to 1964, and he did both Dial M for Murder and Rear Window and To Catch a Thief in short succession, all with Grace Kelly. Um, and so this is certainly early in that in that phase, even though he had made a lot of movies before that. Whereas The Birds in some
It's
ways
the
is
other
kind of
end.
like
Yeah.
that's the other end of that peak, where after that people started saying, "Are we still sure about this guy?" Like he did some great stuff, but maybe he's done. I may be
Fair.
overstating that, but because he kind of always courted controversy, even when his movies were new. But as we look at the birds, and I think it would be irresponsible of us to completely ignore that there was some controversy surrounding the making of that. Not at the time, but that came out kind of later, years later after he died.
Yeah.
Um, but we don't necessarily need to dwell on that for a long time, but I feel like we should probably talk about it. Do you want to like touch on that now, or get there when we talk about it?
I mean, we can probably go through it now.
Okay.
I mean, you can kind of give the I didn't look it all back up again, so I'm probably
Yeah,
not as
I
up on what happened. Yeah.
part of what made me look it up this time in preparation for this was because I'd been somewhat aware of it. And in fact, I actually was the narrator for a short story that was kind of talking about it for audio fiction podcast. And so I'd been aware of that story before. But in the 4K Blu-ray set that I bought that had both of these movies in it, it has some special features, including some interviews, some much later interviews with Tippi Hedren, and I was kind of surprised but not surprised. Like, you know, that Futurama meme of shocked, shocked. Well, not that shocked. That they don't address it in the
Right.
special features for the movie. But basically, the short version is um, there's a lot of kind of uh, details that are ambiguous, meaning like, was this part true? Was that part true? But what seems clear at the very least is that Hitchcock, who had always kind of had an obsession thing going on with the particular kinds of women he liked to cast in his movies, kind of became obsessed with Tippi Hedren and what behaved very inappropriately to her over a period of years. He had managed to get her in a contract that wouldn't let her work for anyone else. And so she was kind of stuck in an industry where people weren't really likely to listen to her if she tried to make a fuss about it. And so she kind of just put up with it. And it was really some of her co-stars that like were the ones later to talk about it before she even did. But then she said, you know, in some later interviews and in her memoir that yeah, he had. Uh, it sounds like there was assault, but not in the like in the sort of like suddenly grabbed me and put his hands on me, that sort of thing.
Right.
Which is not to say that's okay, but just we want to, if we're talking about this, we want to be clear that's what we're talking about.
Right.
That and kind of just generally like obsession and saying inappropriate things and again just the whole power dynamic of I've made you sign something that means you only can work for me and I'm gonna say all sorts of inappropriate things and I'm gonna build a ramp from my office into your trailer and there were also several of the sequences in this movie that sound like they were done without necessarily a sufficient regard for her personal safety or comfort.
Yes. To the point
And
where there is speculation as to whether that was like
yeah,
retribution for her.
yeah,
Um,
like so, and it sounds like in various interviews there have been some slightly different versions of the timeline because she did Marnie with him after this where the actual plot of that movie is kind of more aggressive on these themes. And so in some interviews, she suggested that he didn't get really inappropriate until that one. But in other cases, Rod Taylor, who's her co-star in The Birds, said he saw it happening. So it sounds like, yeah. So I think it's one thing we certainly, anyone who's going to talk about art in a serious way is going to periodically encounter people where you have to sort of say, well, how much can you or are you willing to try to separate the art from the artist, right? Because it's clear that Alfred Hitchcock was a skilled filmmaker. He made a lot of really important, influential movies, and not everyone is going to feel the same way about their ability to still enjoy his movies, knowing that in his personal life and sometimes his professional life, he was kind of a piece of crap sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they actually made a movie called The Girl um, in 2012 that's like about this. And so, and like even Melanie Griffith, who is Tippi Hedren's daughter, which I actually hadn't known until I was looking it up here. But she says that like she remembers seeing some of this too when she was a kid.
Yeah, it's all super frustrating to see because it's
Hmm.
like to your point, like we want to be able to admire the work, admire it, separate
Hmm.
it from the artist. I think you and I both do a pretty good job of that, of just
Hmm.
acknowledging like, hey, like it's not okay what this person did,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy like the work that was produced. And it still sometimes is hard,
Hmm.
And I just went through this again, which is why I wanted to, like I said, let's just bring it up now. Do you know where I'm going?
Neil Gaiman?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yes. One of my favorites, right? And
Yeah.
I th- I th- like I think the Graveyard Book is one of my favorite stories, and it's also my favorite audio book of all time because like him reading it with like just the texture that it needs because
Hmm.
of sort of the the silliness balanced with the threat. Like I don't know, he
Yeah.
delivers it so well, and they were making it for Disney Plus, and now they're not
Hmm.
because of, again, more of a like similar thing of like it was all, at least everything I've seen, the relationships were always consensual. It was his behavior within a consensual relationship that was beyond consent.
Right. Yeah. There's a degree to where someone has given consent, but it's kind of consent under duress in some ways, or not like
It was
extortion or a
consent that we
threat,
will be
but
together in this space, but it is
yeah.
not consent for you to do these things, right? Like
Well,
there's
and
a,
also
yeah,
kind of like a suggestion of like you work for me and I'm really important, and maybe this your position here is contingent on this stuff.
yes, the power dynamic piece as
Yeah.
well is also super frustrating.
Yeah.
Um,
It's pretty awful. It's for sure, and it's a huge bummer because like as you were saying, and I think as a lot of people feel like he's made a lot of art over the years that's really important to a lot of people. And like I was a fan as well, and so and it also just really sort of, I think, the popular perception of who he was as a dude felt like he didn't seem like the kind of guy who would do that. But that's in some ways a good lesson that, people who do stuff like that don't always seem on the outside like the kind of person who would do that.
Correct.
It's an important lesson to recognize. And so, especially once it seemed clear that it wasn't even necessarily just one person, it was just like, oh, okay. Yeah, bummer. But yeah, so I think it's always
I'm
going
glad that
to.
you were clear that I was going that way and not with like P Diddy.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was just talking about like the lesson of how sometimes it's not the sort of people you would expect, and then sometimes it's like, oh yeah, no, I kind of saw that coming.
Yes, like it's, I
Mm,
mean, it's like
I
dark.
mean,
I want to say hilarious, but like in a
yeah.
dark
I mean,
way.
you don't want to
As they bring up all the
diminish.
interviews with him, where
Yeah.
he's basically saying what he's doing but like he's saying in sort of this like nonchalant way. So like the
Yeah.
night shift hosts are like, oh, ha, 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 ha. And then it's like, oh, well, actually, if you piece that together to what that actually
Hmm.
was, like that's what he was doing.
Yeah, and again, we also don't want to diminish like what he did, to, to had people do and what they're pressured to do and like that sort of thing, right? Like because thinking of him, it kind of being funny, like that we might expect that that was what was going on with him, except that like actual people are involved. So
Right. That's why I said it's like I had to
yeah,
clarify. It's like darkly funny
hmm, yeah,
because it's like you realize that like yes, that's funny that you see that, but it's also not funny to the people that were involved. Yeah. No, I
right.
100% agree.
Yeah, and so it's something that I think everyone really needs to decide for themselves. And like this is something we've talked about before on the show, like when we did Annie Hall with Woody Allen, when we've done movies that had Kevin Spacey in them, that sort of thing. It's like I've seen some podcasts where they just kind of they have as a shorthand anytime they're discussing someone where it's something like this, they kind of just go scandal noted. Like we're not ignoring that that's present in the conversation, but it's also not necessarily what we're talking about. But I think, especially in this context with Alfred Hitchcock, if you have people who are maybe still new in their own discovery of classic films, and maybe haven't heard all that stuff because it did happen a long time ago, um, it's worth bringing up, especially since we really didn't talk about it much in the discussion of the other films that we've done. But especially just because some of the most egregious examples happened around Tippi Hedren and around the birds. It's just like this is the place where you kind of have to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where when you hear that stuff, there is an element to where you see threads of that kind of obsession, that sort of obsessive behavior throughout so much of his work.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, certainly, even though like Rear Window is a comedy, it's a comedy about voyeurism, the, uh, and there's a thread of misogyny in there too. Like, not necessarily, I'm saying like from the filmmaker necessarily, but like there's themes of that, right? Because, the murder that happens, and even honestly, Jimmy Stewart's whole deal in some ways. But let's not get too ahead of our skis there because we haven't really even talked about the details of it. So, but I think we've covered adequately that there is some like serious allegations and evidence of stuff that he did, but it's also true that he made some really great movies. And if people feel like they can't care about the movies in that context, that's fair. But I think we want to still discuss them because they're very influential. And I think both of these movies have some clear like descendants where we can see how they influenced other movies to come after them. I mean, with Rear Window, there's been what, like 5 or 6 different remakes of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you ready to talk about Rear Window? Makes sense
And
to me to talk about that one first because it
yeah,
came
especially since
came
we
first.
framed
Yeah.
the time period and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah. So let me get my. So Rear Window, 1954, starring Jimmy Stewart, Grace Kelly, Raymond Burr, Thelma Ritter, and a few other people, but those are kind of like the big characters. Uh, the basic premise is we've got Jimmy Stewart is an adventure photojournalist, the kind of guy who is always putting himself into dangerous situations to get the perfect shot. But in a clever little opening tracking shot, we pan across various bits of stuff in his apartment to learn that the story of his most recent, very exciting photo of a crashing race car also resulted in him having a pretty substantially broken leg, and he is going stir crazy in his apartment because he can't go anywhere because he has a broken leg.
Yes.
And then he, with little else to do, because they didn't have the internet in 1954, he starts looking out the window at his neighbors. And eventually, when he is sufficiently interested, he breaks out his fancy camera zoom lens to get an even closer look. And so we get lots of little minor stories, the different mini plots of various neighbors. But the main thing is that he eventually realizes or begins to suspect that one of his neighbors has murdered his wife. And in the meantime, his girlfriend, or is she, complicated, Grace Kelly, is hanging out and eventually becomes persuaded or intrigued by the mystery as well. And Thelma Ritter is the nurse who I think works for the insurance company. Was that the idea?
Yes, she's the insurance nurse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so she's been coming by to take care of him while he's laid up. And so she kind of starts getting involved too. He has a friend who's a cop who's kind of like helping sort of, but doesn't really believe it. And then Raymond Burr is the neighbor who we suspect may have killed his wife. And then, that's the plot basically, is we got to try to figure out and if we can prove it. And all while with the clever conceit of pretty much staying entirely within his little studio apartment because he can't go anywhere. So we stay with him. And I think actually on my disc there's a deleted scene where he did briefly manage to go to his like editor's office, and they talk about how they actually changed that to him just having that conversation on the phone so that he wouldn't ever leave his apartment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things of what makes this film like so genius, right? Like, is that it just builds an incredible buy-in to like why he's doing it, and like puts you in this like weird spot where you almost like feel okay that he's like being a voyeur, right?
Yeah,
Because they make him funny. They make him somebody who craves excitement and adventure, so he's always like he can't just sit still. They put the heat wave in there. They put the more interesting than not neighbors that is like would attract your attention to watch. And then they lock it all down into you only see what he sees. And it's
with one exception that I had actually forgotten until rewatching it this time. But yeah, there's the bit early on where he falls asleep, and we see a woman leaving that apartment. And when if we were watching this for the first time and really didn't know, it would be easy for us to conclude, oh, there she is. He's barking up the wrong tree because he was just asleep during this critical moment.
Right.
But then, of course, because this is a 70-year-old movie, we're free to spoil that it turns out there actually was a murder and that was the mistress who was trying to pose as the wife.
Yes.
But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to distract your role, but I thought I hadn't remembered that there was that one little bit.
No, I mean, you didn't. I kind of concluded. I just think it's very clever how it like gets you on the side of the voyeur. Like it's flipping the script, right? Like normally the dude who's just hanging out in his balcony, like checking everybody out through his camera, would be the weirdo.
Yeah.
But we're okay with him being the hero. Because
more or less. Yeah.
More or less, right? I mean, yeah, but it gets you there, right? Like it gets you to where you're like kind of rooting for him to be okay and to solve it and all that. Like not the hero, you don't want to, yeah.
Well, and I think he ultimately is the hero, even if we can still say that like probably he shouldn't have been looking at his neighbors quite so much, even if it worked out in this case. But I think you're absolutely right, though, in the sense that the movie is not telling us that it's okay or good for him to be spying on his neighbors this way. But what the movie is great at is recognizing that everybody kind of has that temptation, and then giving him a bunch of reasons why he's indulging in that temptation, right? Because all the normal things that we might do to say, what's going on over there? Oh, you know what? None of my business. I'm going to go off and do something else instead. He kind of can't, right? He doesn't have anything else to do. And he is kind of temperamentally predisposed. Like he's a photojournalist, right? Like his whole deal is trying to get the story and see the thing that people don't want him to see. That's kind of his whole
Right.
thing. And because he can't go anywhere else, the only places he can try to do that are with his neighbors. And so the movie gives us a lot of these reasons to be sympathetic for why he would be indulging in this prurient interest. So even and part of the fun there, of course, is all of his friends basically saying the same thing and yet getting pulled right in very easily. Because everyone really kind of has that temptation, even though in polite society we try not to indulge in it too much, right? But curiosity about what's going on with your neighbors is a very natural, and like it's not even an unhealthy desire, but it's boundaries, right? And so that's kind of just where all that plays in. But it strikes a really cool tone, and I think this is what made it so appealing to me too when I first watched it. Is that I knew it was a story about a possible murder, but it was also so funny.
Yes.
And the comic beats of his girlfriend and the nurse and his buddy all telling him, "What are you doing? This is inappropriate. You shouldn't be acting like this." But then as he tells them more and more, they're trying to like dissuade him, but they're intrigued nonetheless, and they kind of end up getting just roped in right alongside him. And it's just fun to be kind of brought along on that ride. And it does such a good job of that because, up until there's this moment where he suspects the murder, it's relatively harmless watching, right? Like he's just seeing people like that have their windows open. Everyone's got their windows open because it's so hot. And it's just like we got all of these little stories like the newlyweds who he watches come in and then go into the bedroom and pull the blinds and then don't come out for the whole rest of the movie. Except for the one sequence where everybody does. There's Miss Torso. I'm doing finger quotes for the audio. Because that's his nickname for this girl who seems to be like she wants to be a dancer. We kind of get the sense that maybe she's not currently successfully being a professional dancer, but maybe would like to. She like practices and dances to music. We've got a songwriter who seems like he's having a hard time. We've got Miss Lonely Hearts who's very lonely, trying to get out there but struggling with rejection. We got the neighbors that have the little dog, and then of course the salesman and his wife who they don't seem to be getting along. But yeah, so like with all of those little mini stories that we can be drawing on from moment to moment, even when nothing's happening in that main story, there's always, it's a little bit like he's flipping channels on the TV, right?
Yep. Or scrolling.
Yeah, scrolling, yeah. Where, it's just, well, if this window is boring for a little while, let's see what's going on over there. The other thing that I was really kind of struck me more on this watch than on previous viewings was how clear and obvious it is that Jimmy Stewart's character is just a huge dope for not letting Grace Kelly marry him immediately.
Yes.
What a dummy. I'm trying to remember his name in this movie. It's Jimmy Stewart's
Isn't it
Jeff
Jeff,
LB
right?
Jeffries. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff.
Jeff
Yeah.
Jeffries. Yeah, and so he's this photojournalist, and his girlfriend is Lisa Fremont, and played by Grace Kelly, and who, uh, I saw a post describe her in this movie as the most beautiful a woman has ever been in a movie, and it's like that's a pretty extreme position, but I'm hard pressed to argue. Like she's pretty gorgeous in this movie, right?
Yes.
And the thing, so she's a model, and she's not just beautiful, but she's also cool and funny, and for reasons unclear to the audience, she is just hopelessly in love with Jimmy Stewart as Jeffries, even though basically his reaction to her presence is frequently irritation and disinterest. Like he likes her, but he, like she wants to be like, hey, you should stay in New York so we can hang out more. And he's like, no, I gotta go walk around the jungle. And you wouldn't like it. Your heels would get stuck in the mud or whatever he's saying, right? And meanwhile, it's just like we in the audience are going, you idiot, what are you doing? What a dope he is in this movie. I just like, I think that it was something I hadn't fully appreciated on previous times watching this movie, but it was just seemed huge in this viewing. But
It
funny.
it is funny, and I think that's like part of the I think that's part of the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's and I think eh, like Hitchcock, like I mean Grace Kelly's beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
but like he used cinematography techniques to make her look
Oh
extra
yeah.
beautiful
Mm-hmm.
on purpose to make this seem like so silly that this guy's like
Mm-hmm.
would rather be doing this other stuff, right?
Yeah. Like she, this is a woman who is successful in her own right, has plenty of money, gorgeous, and is has come to him while he's in his apartment with a broken leg and arranged to have a fancy restaurant bring them in-home catering. And this is not just like to go; like they have fancy dishes and like those little the little serving platters and stuff like that. She's brought him a fancy dinner and then wants to hang out. She's brought a nightgown and slippers in her purse, and he's like, no, I gotta keep looking out my window with the binoculars. Incredible.
Yes. And just to reiterate, like how pretty she is, like in real life, and also successful. Like she
Hmm.
married the Prince of Monaco.
Yeah. Hmm. And
So
yeah.
it makes it even funnier looking back,
Hmm.
like that that woman had a successful career, married an incredibly like what successful, I guess, even if it's just genetic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's yeah, high status.
High status, had a
Yeah.
high status marriage. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Became
It's
a
just
literal princess.
yes,
Um,
she
yeah.
was literally a princess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's not even just that she's beautiful. She's also just she's
Right.
fun. She's interesting. She's interested in him. And again, like we
She's
get this.
helpful to him
Yeah,
in his weird fucking weird
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And she like we get the sense too that we talked about like everyone getting drawn into his voyeuristic shenanigans here. But we get the sense for her that at least at first, it's not so much that she is actually interested in that as much as she's trying to play along because it's what he's interested in. She's like, he's ignoring me. How do I stay involved with what he's doing? And so she kind of starts helping him to speculate and like bounce the ideas off of like, well, you know, what does it mean that the flowers are taller in the flower bed now, you know, or were taller before, you know, like what does that mean? And so she's like kind of being willing to like engage in that stuff, but then she of course um, also needs to prove to him that she can be adventurous too and brave, because that's basically his stated objection to them taking things to the next level, is that, well, I want to go on all these adventure trips and you wouldn't like it because you're used to your fancy clothes and fancy food. And so she has to prove, like, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to sneak over to that apartment while they're gone. And we get just like the amazing sequence where she's going over and she's giving him the little wave. And then, you know, sneaking in, and we watch her like, oh, she's in the bedroom, but he's coming home. And like, that's just incredible sequence. And then the whole little bit where she tries to get Slick and has the ring that they're looking for. And she's like, trying to gesture through the window that she's got the ring, even while she's standing in there in the room with the guy and a policeman. But then, of course, that's what gives her away, because Raymond Burr says, like, what is she doing? Looks out the window. Hey, wait a minute. Oh man. But like, and so she is just so fun in this movie. Like, I mean, Jimmy Stewart, you know, is great in lots of things. We've certainly talked plenty of times about how great Jimmy Stewart is broadly over a long career. But I don't think we've probably talked about Grace Kelly before on the podcast, and I just think she's awesome. She's so fun in this movie.
She is awesome, and I mean, she's in a number of Hitchcocks.
Yeah. Well, in particular, like we were just saying, it like she was in three of them back to back: Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and then To Catch a Thief, just like 1954, 1954, 1955.
Hey,
Yeah. And so, yeah. And so, yeah, she's just super cool, and loved revisiting this movie and seeing how great she is in it. And then we also have Thelma Ritter as the nurse, who's also lots of fun, who has, first of all, she gets to play the audience surrogate in telling him what a dummy he is for not appreciating Lisa enough. But also having her own sort of tut tut, I'm so prim and proper. I would never be interested in such things, except that I'm also the one whose mind goes to, well, obviously he must have cut up the body and put it into pieces and spread them and let me dump them in the river. But of course, I would never be interested in such things, you know. And so she's lots of fun too. And like this movie has such a great balance of having the different characters that can carry the different moods of what's needed, right? Because, for example, when Grace Kelly is over there in the apartment and we're scared for her, I think it helps the scene that Jimmy Stewart has someone to talk to in expressing his concern, right? So having the nurse be there with him to express that fear helps the scene, I think, and because it lets him say stuff out loud that might feel phony for him to be saying just to himself in an empty room.
yes.
So it's just such a great sense of story in that way, of like what elements do you need to carry the tone you're looking for in each sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and that was going to lead to like probably the last thing. I mean, we can obviously talk about more things, but the last thing that I really wanted to talk about was like how tight this script is, right? Like, outside of obviously what we talked about buying it, the buy-in that we get to the voyeurism, like there's all these little pieces of like these machinations that don't feel like machinations, right? Of like allowing him to talk and share what he's doing. And then just even the denouement of after the climax of like how wonderful all that is, right? Like, there,
Mm-hmm.
so we haven't got to that part yet, but he gets attacked in his apartment,
Yeah.
ends up falling out his rear window,
Mm-hmm.
and so it cuts back to him having broken his other leg.
Yeah.
And and then just to the point about the Grace Kelly
Mm-hmm.
character, Lisa, she's laying there with him
Mm-hmm.
and she's reading travel books.
Yeah. And she's not dressed so fancy. She's kind of
Right.
just
She's
in
a little
like,
more
yeah.
casual. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's like getting into his lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then we go and we start to pan to the neighbors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Lonely Heart and the songwriter are now having a date,
Mm-hmm.
because of what he did.
Yeah.
And
And
just like that,
Miss
yeah.
Torso has apparently a boyfriend that was just away in the war, and he's totally not the sort of guy we would expect. He's like a little shrimpy guy. Or no,
Yes.
wait, no, it wasn't that. It was like skinny guy that apparently like had been heavier and lost a bunch of weight when he was in the army. That's what
Yes.
they say. But like in any case, she had all these suitors, and her plot line was like, who will she pick? And it turns out she has this a serious boyfriend that she's been waiting for all along. So she was never going to talk to any of those guys. And yeah, and then you get all these the newlyweds finally emerge from their bedroom.
Yeah. Like it's just it's so slick.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's such a good drama, mystery drama, but it also is like so funny and so tight, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, and then that final little button where we see Grace Kelly notice that Jeff is actually asleep, and she switches out the travel book for a fashion magazine.
Forgot about that part. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun. I want to talk a little bit about when Raymond Burr finally like comes over and confronts him in this attack, because the sequence where he's turned out all of his lights hoping that he'll get the wrong apartment and it doesn't work, and then he has nothing else to defend himself with, so he just grabs these like big flash bulbs for his camera,
Yep.
which do dazzle this guy who's stalking towards him. Like he briefly pauses as though captured in a moment of time in a snapshot, but nonetheless continues. And so I think it's so interesting because there's a little bit of a dreamlike element, because I think if we were to try to approach that sequence only from a pure objective logical standpoint, it's kind of a silly thing to even try, right? Like what's he think, what does he think, there's no long term, what is happening here? Like it is only sort of a desperate, like it'll maybe stop him for a second, but he can't even, it's not even like it'll distract him so he can get away, because he can't go anywhere, right? So like why does he even try that? And I think I was watching some of the special features, and they talked about it, how it's kind of intentionally a little bit dreamlike, like a nightmare, like it's all that he knows how to do, because he's built his whole life around this is the only thing he can do.
Right.
And now that it has come to a life and death moment, he realizes how futile it is. So as much as he always talks about like he is willing to risk his life to get these photos, now that his life is really in danger and he's not in control, he finds that those skills are of no use to him. And
I
it's
like
all,
that.
yeah. And I think it, so it's thematic, even if in some respects it kind of doesn't really make any sense why he would even try it. But it does have a great feel, like a nightmare, like a horror movie villain who's walking slowly towards you, right? Um,
Yep.
um, it's I always also kind of react to, like, this is Raymond Burr in the role as the neighbor. And even though I have probably seen this movie with Raymond Burr in it more than any other thing that I've seen with Raymond Burr in it, but I still think he looks weird without the beard. I just think of Raymond Burr as having a beard, and he doesn't have the beard in this movie, and it makes me feel like he looks weird, even though I have seen him more in this than in other things where he has the beard. That's just on me, but it is something I notice every time.
I hadn't like paid attention to that.
Well, he has a like a notable beard in some of his like later stuff when he's like being Perry Mason.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. But yeah, in any case, that's not like important or anything. It's just something my brain offers up to me every time I watch this movie. But I have watched this movie several times because it's great and I have fond memories of it. Uh, so
It
I,
is a lot of fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like it is probably there are certainly plenty of other Hitchcock movies that have comedy. And I know that there's at least one that I haven't seen. I think The Trouble with Harry is supposed to be pretty
That's
much a
pretty.
comedy.
I like that one. Yeah.
Yeah. But I haven't seen that one. He made a lot of movies. So there is a lot of them that I haven't seen. But this is one of the funnier ones where like even when there is tension or real stakes, it's still kind of all in a largely comic movie.
Yes.
Like, I mean, I would say that the movie is a comedy. It's, you know, it's like, it's a comedy thriller, maybe, but it's comedy for most of the runtime. It's till it gets real. Because even the idea that maybe the neighbor murdered someone is treated with comic handling.
Yes.
But, and I think part of actually what helps keep that funny is just that the reveals of the different sorts of clues that he gets is always very carefully handled to be just enough for us to go, yeah, that's a little suspicious, but does it really prove anything? No, not really. And so for him to be so sure throughout the movie, we're always made to feel like he's a little ahead of himself. Like
Yeah.
maybe what he's pointing out is a little weird, but does that mean that he murdered his wife? You know, like and I think it helps that plot line stay funny for a long time because it feels less like a real murder has happened and more like it's funny that he thinks a murder has happened.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, anything else to say about Rear Window, or shall we uh, fly across to Bodega Bay?
We should fly across to Bodega Bay, but I might have to run upstairs and get my charger so
Okay.
that I not have a disruption if that's okay.
Aha. Well, yes. Let's not have a disruption beyond running up to get your charger. But
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a disruption, but
well, here. How about this? I will pull up the Rear Window trivia page and read from it while you do that. The film. So this is from the IMDb trivia page for Rear Window. The film negative was damaged considerably as a result of color dye fading as early as the 1960s. Nearly all of the yellow image dyes had faded. Despite fears that the film had been irrevocably damaged, preservation experts were able to restore the film nearly to its original coloration. I actually bought a 4K Blu-ray set that has both of the movies we're discussing tonight and also Psycho and Vertigo. And those feature the restoration versions and some special features that are pretty neat about the restoration process. So let's see, we've got another one here. Is the entire movie was shot on one set, which required months of planning and construction. The apartment courtyard set measured 98 feet wide, 185 feet long, and 40 feet high, and consisted of 31 apartments, 12 of which were completely furnished. The courtyard was set 20 to 30 feet below stage level, and some of the buildings were the equivalent of 5 or 6 stories high. The movie was shot quickly on the heels of Dial M for Murder. That's actually something we hadn't talked about very much, was just the incredible set here, where it feels like this little courtyard that he's on, but you know, he has this ability to have lines of sight on all of these different apartments for his various neighbors. So another one here is I learned a little bit about this on the Blu-ray as well, but according to Georgine Darcy, the man and the woman on the fire escape struggling to get out of the rain was based on a prank by Alfred Hitchcock. Each actor and actress in the apartment complex facing Jeff's rear window wore an earpiece through which they could receive Hitchcock's directions. Hitchcock told the man to pull the mattress in one direction and told the woman to pull in the opposite direction. Unaware that they had received conflicting directions, the couple began to fight and struggle to get the mattress inside once the crew began filming. The resulting mayhem, in which one of the couple is tossed inside the window with the mattress, provided humor and a sense of authenticity, which Hitchcock liked. He was so pleased with the result that he did not order another take. It is a funny little anecdote, but it is also does raise the question that we hear about when we hear about like pranks or things where in a movie like a director like doesn't tell the actor or actress that something's about to happen so that their reaction is authentic, that sort of thing. That's I think sometimes a behavior that like I think sometimes also you're hiring actors. And sometimes you could just like let them act. You don't have to actually like deceive them as human beings.
Yes.
But this particular anecdote, it is kind of funny, and it is especially as you watch that take, and you definitely just see them each trying to do something different, and it's kind of funny to just realize that the actors literally had been given conflicting directions, and so I think that's interesting. All right, so now that you're back, let's talk about The Birds. It is made in 1963, starring Tippi Hedren, Rod Taylor, Jessica Tandy, and Suzanne Pleshette. And I'm mentioning Veronica Cartwright, who is Kathy, the little girl, the younger sister of Rod Taylor's character, even though she looks like she's 35 years younger than him. But I noted her in particular because I had just rewatched the 70s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in which that actress is in that movie as an adult. And so it was kind of like having just watched that and then putting on The Birds, it was funny to like, hey, wait, I know her. I just saw her. So that was kind of funny. Just
So
a
in
fun
real life,
coincidence.
she's 19 years younger than him.
19. Okay, yeah, I was kind of exaggerating, but it is also this effect too of like when you watch movies from like the 50s and 60s, people who are in their 30s and 40s look old by today's standards frequently.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they didn't have the same kinds of fancy moisturizers and stuff that we do these days, I guess. They smoke and drank a lot more too.
Yeah, he was only 33.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I certainly I'm glad you looked it up because I certainly had overstated it. But yeah, the point just being,
I agree with the point.
yeah,
I was not.
she looks like she could be his kid or maybe a niece or something, as opposed to, oh yeah, my little sister.
Yes, if they had said niece is probably accurate.
Mhm.
Kid, you could have gotten away with for sure.
Yeah.
But if niece, I would have like it would have it. But yes, I had the same visceral reaction to like.
Well, she's too
There's a
young because
significant
like,
age gap, and it is a significant age gap. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
well, like, and his mom, played by Jessica Tandy, is like, she feels like the right age to be his mom, but that also like it just with this kid who's maybe like 12, it just suggests that she was rather old when she had the baby, which which happens. It's not like unreasonable. That happens all the time, but it does read as surprising, right? It doesn't feel obvious. It feels like unusual.
correct. Yeah, just I quickly pulled all their birth dates.
Oh yeah.
If it was real, like to their
Mhm.
actual ages, Jessica Tandy would have been 40 when she had her. So
Okay. Yeah.
it's
Sure.
a fair analysis. Like it's not unreasonable for it to
Mm,
be true, but it's
yeah.
also like,
Less
oh,
common.
especially to the point of like
Well,
people
and
age
also just like,
faster.
yeah, well, and for her to have also already had a kid 19 years before that.
Yes.
That's a
And
heck of a
then
gap.
waited 19 years
Yeah.
before having the next kid.
Well,
Right.
yeah,
Like,
I suspect that part of this is just an element of this is based on a book, and I didn't look this up, but I think it might just be that like he left the sort of as written familial relationship, but cast the actors he wanted, and kind of he didn't care very much that the ages seemed a little strange.
right.
But in any case, yeah. So Rod Taylor as Mitch Brenner, and Tippi Hedren as Melanie Daniels are the characters that we sort of meet first. And Tippi Hedren as Melanie Daniels is an interesting character in this because there's a lot of Hitchcock movies where we have like a cool blonde who's in a little bit of trouble or doing something a little bit like underhanded or sneaky or devious or something, right? You know, we think of Psycho with Vivian Lee who's stealing money right at the beginning, right? In this case, we don't see her actually doing those things, but we learn through Rod Taylor's character that she's been kind of notorious in the gossip rags. And according to her, some of those stories are exaggerated slash made up, and it's a little unfair. Like she fell in a fountain, and that turned into a story of her frolicking naked in a fountain. But it's this funny. So I'm trying to remember exactly what that initial setup is because like she did something to him that she doesn't recognize him now, and so like he briefly pretends to mistake her for a shop employee at this pet store, and then he says he basically tricked her to because she did something else, and I don't remember what that was. Do you? Oh, let's
Yeah.
see. Recognizing Melanie from her court appearance regarding a practical joke gone awry. So I guess it wasn't like to him, but it was like he saw her previously, so he knew who she was to begin with. But then he pretends to think she's working at the pet store, and then she kind of goes along with it up until the point where she's like, "Oh, sure, you want some lovebirds? How about these right here?" And he's like, "Those are obviously canaries." It's like, "Well, they're yellow lovebirds." She says something like that, and so she goes along with it for a little while, but um, it's kind of a fun dynamic though that he gets under her skin enough, but in a charming enough way that she basically becomes obsessed with not letting him have the final laugh in this very low stakes prank contest.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. Like she's ultimately driving up there for an elaborate prank.
She goes to they don't have the lovebirds at the store where they are, so she
Right.
has to special order them, and then the plan first is to just deliver them to his apartment, and she's not even going to go inside or talk to him. She's just going to like leave them with a little card. But then his neighbor says, "Oh, he's not even here. He drove up the coast to Bodega Bay. He's going to be there all weekend." And so then she decides, okay, well then I got these birds and I can't back down now, so I'm going to drive all the way up to Bodega Bay. Then I'm going to ask around until I can find out where he lives. And then, oh,
Yes.
wait, I have to rent a boat and use a motorboat to go all the way across the bay to get to his house? Sure, why not? I'll do that. All so she can sneak into his house. And it's fun, too, that after all of that, she sneaks into his house to leave these little lovebirds, which he had bought for his little sister. Um, uh, and apparently, the card was supposed to be like chewing him out for this mean thing he did, which again was like it wasn't even that mean, right? Like it's basically an emotional overreaction to her being attracted to him. right? Like that's clearly what's happening. I think it's very transparent to us, the audience, is that she is mad because she doesn't want to like him, but can't quite help herself, and so this is all of that energy is being sublimated into other things.
Yes.
But like, so um, she leaves the lovebirds and is trying to get away on the boat, and and this is fun too, because like this is like half an hour into the movie, right? And nothing weird has happened yet. We've seen a few shots of like birds flying around, but like nothing else has happened, and it just feels like it could be a drama. We're setting up all of this stuff. um, he sees her trying to get away on the boat, so he gets in his car and like speeds along the road around the bay so that he can catch up and meet her at the boat. And it's a whole thing where there's going to be this whole bit where he's going to stand there and say, "Ha ha, you thought you got away, huh?" But then all of that's interrupted because a seagull like dive bombs her as she's coming into the port and like cuts her scalp, and it's just all, oh, it's weird. And thus the birds has properly begun.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said, and I think I like also that this movie did the same thing that Rear Window did, which with some of its absurdity,
Hmm.
like it you get buy-in, right? Like you don't necessarily agree that she should go do what she did, like to
Yeah,
drop the kids
it's
off.
it's
Like
crazy.
you're okay with it.
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
we
you're sympathetic.
understand why, even though it's obviously a silly thing to do.
Yes. Sympathetic, I think, was
Yeah.
the word you use in Rear Window. And I think that's an appropriate word here too. Like
Hmm.
you're sympathetic to like why, because she's in this like prank mode and she likes him
Hmm.
and it just kind of kept escalating, but she's like that kind of person who's just like not gonna back down,
Yeah.
that like you get to this point,
Hmm.
right? And so that was all really fun. And I agree with you also that it had very much psycho vibes of like this setup of
Hmm.
like, is there something even, but
Well, and like there's a whole sequence we didn't even talk about where she's trying to find out where he lives and ends up talking to Annie, the school teacher, who is his ex.
yes,
And so that's a whole awkward thing where she's like trying to cover like, well, why are you here? Why are you looking for him? And then they have this whole conversation about like Annie basically, like, it sounds like it was not quite a very clear someone dumped the other situation, but ultimately Annie believes that it was his mom who got in the way. Like, she
yes.
wasn't going to let anyone have him, and he wasn't able, for whatever reason, to put a boundary there.
Also a psycho vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, you know, gosh, are there some themes that we see resonating over and over within Hitchcock's work? I think so. But it's just like I said. I mean, we have set up multiple characters and complex interrelationship dynamics between them, and taking their time and doing that with nuance, with all of that in a movie that we know is about birds attacking people. But like, I don't remember exactly what the time code is, but we're really like half an hour, 35 minutes in before the first bird attack.
Yes.
And,
No,
and
yeah,
even
I
then it's a
wasn't.
slow burn after that. I think it's another 15 minutes before the second one.
Yeah, it doesn't really get until, I mean, it's again, like you said, I don't have the time codes, but
Hmm.
it's not really until the playground attack of the children where you like realize like can realize like we
Yeah.
know this is a thing, but like that's when it's
Hmm.
like, oh, this is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Whatever is happening is a problem,
Right.
not just a couple of weird things happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, we get I think the escalation is the seagull attacks her on the boat.
Yep.
Then there's the kids' birthday party, where the kids are attacked in the backyard, and it's like it's scary, but it's kind of all resolved relatively quickly. Nobody's really hurt. It's kind of just like, wow, that was really strange, wasn't it? And that's after the seagull. And then we also get the neighbor. The mom had been in some sort of a business feud with this neighbor who was trying to sell them feedstock, and she was like mad that he's not giving her the right price or whatever. So she decides she's going to go over and give him a piece of her mind, only to discover he has been pecked to death by birds. But it's this great dialogue-free sequence where she's the character that has not shut up since she's been on screen, but she goes over there, and it's a wordless sequence that she's going in, and she's like, why is he not coming out to meet me? Why didn't he answer the phone? Why is his door open? Why are those coffee mugs broken? And then discovering this grisly sight in the bedroom, and then running out, and just like she's not even made a sound yet, and then we kind of get her scream along with the car engine as they're driving away. It's such a neat sequence.
Yeah.
And then
The
of course,
playground sequence I was referring to, I was kind of coupling two things together.
yeah.
I meant
Well,
backyard.
oh, okay, yeah. So, but yeah, certainly there's because we get the huge set piece after all of that, which is, now that she's so rattled, she asks if Melanie will go get their kids from school so that they're not like walking home by themselves. And she agrees to do it, and we get the incredible like jungle gym sequence where she's at the school, but they're busy. They're in the middle of singing some weird little rhymey nonsense song. And according to some of the special features I saw, they had to write 5 new verses of that song so that it would be long enough for the sequence. So like it's a traditional song, but they wrote new verses for it so that they wouldn't just be repeating. But so just the whole bit though of we've been set up to already be wary of birds, and Melanie is wary of birds, but she's also not like afraid to be sitting outside, and we get the whole sequence of, we're cutting between her on the bench and the jungle gym behind her, where there's 1, and then there's 3, and then there's 5, and then there's a long sequence where we don't cut back, and it's just building and building and building. And then when we finally do cut back, there's so many more than we thought there was going to be.
Yes.
It's awesome.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, those were, like I said, the 2 great sequences that I sort of conflated. But yeah, that one is so good.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they build on the jungle gym, like,
Yeah.
because that's I think why I conflated them, right? Because it's like, okay, the backyard party is when you realize, okay, the birds are a problem.
Yeah. Well,
And then you go into the guy being dead from the birds. And so we know the birds are a problem.
yeah.
We also know that our characters don't necessarily know the birds are a problem.
Right. Well, and to some extent, audience expectations are built in because this is a movie called The Birds about birds attacking people, right? So, like the movie is made with the understanding of people buying a ticket for a movie where birds are going to attack people, right? So like there's that element, but it does build it right, and having the characters take the time to, like with the first one with the seagull, it's just like, wow, that was weird. But yeah, seagulls are aggressive sometimes. That one was a little strange, but like, what are you going to do? There's nothing else to be done about it. It's a weird one-off fluke thing, right? But then when there's the birthday party, it's like, well, that was a couple of different kinds of birds attacking together for no obvious reason, and attacking the kids and leaving the food on the table alone. That seems really, really strange. And that's on top of the seagull already. But even then, you're still like, well, but what are we saying? Like, birds are attacking people? Like, that seems like, how could that be? Right? Like, you're still not ready to, like, really believe it. And that actually, I think one of my favorite scenes, honestly, doesn't even have any bird attacks. It's the scene in the diner where they're all kind of just discussing it. And you got bird expert lady who's basically saying, A, it's impossible what you're saying could not possibly be true. but also with the other B point of that of like, well, it can't possibly be true, and thank goodness, because if it were true, there would be no way to stop them. There's so many.
Yes.
And then, we've got just all the little moving pieces of that scene. Her and the drunk who's kind of seems on board with the idea that this is happening, but doesn't know what to do about it, and he mostly wants to get out of there. You've got the mom and the kid that are getting scared hearing all of this. Melanie just trying to say, "Look, I'm not pretending I understand what's happening here, but I know what I saw." And all of that stuff. It's such a cool sequence, and then it's paired, of course, later after the big the gas station sequence with everybody's hiding inside, and the bird expert ladies just kind of like won't meet anybody's eye. It's such a great little bookend to a really cool dialogue scene.
Yes.
The other thing that really struck me when I rewatched this, and this was actually part of.
Struck you. Struck you.
Oh yeah, like a bird. Yes. This movie, when I was rewatching it, made me say, "Gosh, I think this movie must have been really influenced by Night of the Living Dead." Except then I looked it up, and it was actually made 2 years earlier than Night of the Living Dead.
Yes.
I don't even remember if it's 2 years. It's a few years at least. But so it seems in hindsight then that it must be that the other way around, like that Night of the Living Dead was influenced by this one. But just consider that whole final sequence where they're barricaded into the house, and the barricades are being pecked through. Right? And just even the concept of a threat where like one or two or even just a couple aren't necessarily that big a deal, but there's so many. Right? And then you even have the blonde heroine who we think is going to be the main character, but then kind of gets sidelined at some point. Like even though obviously for Melanie it happens much later in the movie than for Barbara in Night of the Living Dead, but still it's just like, the scene where the blonde goes upstairs to see what's going on and gets really freaked out by something. Like there's a lot of overlap there, and that's not to suggest that Night of the Living Dead like ripped it off or anything. I'm not saying anything like that, but it seems obvious like there must have been influence there, and I think that was kind of cool to realize that the influence worked the other way than I thought.
Yeah, I agree.
The special effects for all of the birds it's interesting, I think, to look at them now, because while I think by modern standards, a lot of the compositing is really obvious, including in some sequences where it just feels like, why are they even compositing in this scene? Like, it seems like you could have just put actual Tippi Hedren in a real rowboat instead of having her on a rowboat on a set that you composite in front of water. Like, why did you even do it that way?
Right, but it's just like it was so standard to that point that like when we up on in our current world,
Yeah.
it just like doesn't look right.
Well, but the other thing too that some of these special features on it really highlighted for me, that in a way that I thought was interesting, is that for the time, some of this compositing was actually really like remarkable in advance, and in fact using like different colors for the compositing in order to allow you to have blues and greens on the screen while they're doing these compositing, and how they did it and how they were layering the animated birds versus photos of like real flying birds versus the actual on-set real birds. And apparently there was lots of attempts with like mechanical birds that didn't work very well. But there's also a whole lot of the scenes where there's just like hundreds and hundreds of birds, where if you watch it carefully, something like 70% of the birds we're seeing on screen actually don't move at all, because they're not real birds, they're fake birds. But they are interspersed with real birds who themselves move enough that it really reads to the eye as though they're all real birds. And I think that stuff is actually still really effective. You really only notice that if you're looking for it.
Right.
Um, one of the other things that I thought was interesting from these special features is that there was originally a whole additional ending sequence in the script that they basically just decided they didn't need and would have been really expensive to film. But there's just like, there would have been a whole extra scene after they drive away from the house where it pays off the fact that they make the bizarre decision of not using the pickup truck and instead driving the convertible with a soft top.
Yes.
I every time I watch this movie, I know that I think part of the explanation is that one of the windows is broken on the pickup truck. I think is the reason. But at the same time, it does, just like every time I watch them piling into that tiny convertible that they have to fit 5 people in, and it's got a soft top, I just like, that seems like a recipe for disaster to me. And then sure enough, in this original final sequence, they're driving away, and there's this, this long drawn out bit where, um, like the birds seem like they are just like letting them go, like they're driving away slowly, and the birds are just watching until eventually they get to a point where there are birds standing in the road, and like they can't get past without like disturbing them. And then as soon as they do, the birds are all over them again, and they start trying to drive faster and faster down the road, but like it's curving too much, and it's paralleling the early sequence of her driving to Bodega Bay, where we watch her taking those curves at high speed, and it's meant to be like that road going the other way.
Right.
And the birds are attacking, and they're trying to tear off the soft top. And basically the way it all pays off is that just by the time the birds finally manage to meaningfully tear through the soft top, the road finally straightens out, and they're able to drive fast enough to leave the birds behind. And that would have been the ending. And like, I feel like that's like, it doesn't sound terrible, but I feel like it doesn't meaningfully change the state of the story, right?
Right.
Because the birds are still a threat. We still don't know why it's happening, but they seem to be getting away for the moment, at least. And so we've had kind of just an extra action sequence that just would have also been really expensive to film, but doesn't really ultimately add or change anything. And so I think it's interesting, but the right call that they took that out. But it was this was apparently a very rare thing for Hitchcock, for him to like make those sorts of changes on the fly during filming. Like usually he had stuff planned out very meticulously, and like, what was in the script is what they filmed usually.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. But so I mean, I've done a lot of talking. I don't want to like I just had all these special features.
Yeah. I mean, you covered all the plot points of the story and like some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I sort of interjected where it was appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I Where I think it's funny is that I've actually been in places in my life, not where birds were attacking, but where you had that weird congregation of birds.
Mm.
Like when I lived in Austin, there's these birds called the grackles.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Are you familiar with grackles?
yeah. They have grackles in Colorado,
Okay.
but you
So
don't usually see a ton of them at once.
there are time periods, and I'm not sure exactly what like makes it happen, but like where there's a lot of grackles in Austin. And there would be times where like I would get out of my car to like go into the gym, and I would look at the power lines, and it would just be grackles.
Yeah. For anyone who's not familiar with grackles, they're pretty big, dark birds. They're, if you imagine like a 3/4 scale raven, they're kind of like that.
That feels like a velociraptor.
Yeah, they're kind of aggressive. Like not necessarily like they'll attack you, but like they really want your food and they'll go for it.
Yes. And they have like a hiss to them and like all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
so there would be times, and I would think of this movie when I would look at these power lines and be like, the exact same thing. Like I'd be like, I'm fine. These birds aren't going to do anything. But if they decided to, like, I would be helpless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing is, that is so makes the threat in this movie so interesting, is that you think of a bird, like if a bird swooped at you, like maybe it would, like, peck you or claw you once, but then like you just hit it with a good swat of your hand and it's done for. But what if there's 400 of them and they don't stop when you kill a few of them?
Right.
And like that, and uh I think it's important to this movie to give it stakes that we lose Annie, for example, right? The school teacher, because we like her. We meet her early on. She's like a significant character, and then she's helping later, and she's involved in the whole sequence escaping from the school. But then for her to be killed, um, sets the final act in a place where, like, we're really scared that people will die here, like people that we know.
Yeah.
Uh, cool. I feel like I had another thing to say after that, but I don't remember now. I think it's interesting to see Jessica Tandy in here, just because although, like, she's not like young in this movie. In my head, Jessica Tandy is like the really old lady from like Driving Miss Daisy. And so even just seeing her in, uh, middle age here, she's maybe in her, in her 50s?
She would have been. I'm trying to remember back to when I looked up all their ages.
Well, you said, yeah,
54.
54? Yeah. I was going to say, like you said, she would have been 20 or whatever when the daughter.
No, the age gap was 20 years.
Okay. Oh, no, yes, she would have been 40 when the daughter was born.
Yeah.
That's what she said. Yeah, so in any case, yeah. But like she's interesting in that. And so the message I sent you after finishing rewatching it this time was just as a final note of all of them piled into the car and driving away. It's kind of like, well, that's one way to impress your future mother-in-law, because of course we get the payoff to all of that emotional tension that gets set up before the birds start to attack. It actually, like, doesn't come the way we would expect, but Melanie does win over the respect of Mitch's mother.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I can't believe we were gonna finish though without actually talking about the sequence where she goes up to the bedroom. Which just because like it is that I think in some respects that one and the Jungle Gym are kind of like the two.
Okay.
The two I think that people sort of think of the most. But like this is the scene where, like, if you haven't seen the movie, they're all kind of barricaded into the house, but she has gone up to she investigating like a sound, like, just let's go see if the birds have gotten in. She's sort of peering into a bedroom, and she sees some evidence that they may have gotten in, but it's not obvious how many right away. She kind of steps a little too far into the room, so that once the birds start to attack and she tries to back up, she accidentally closes the door behind her, so she's kind of pinned against the door. And it is a very, like, scary sequence. I mean, it's like this movie's equivalent of the Psycho shower scene, right? And it is that, just we really get that sense too of she's trying to get the door open to get away, and they keep sort of knocking her against it, and she's having to try to defend herself and all that.
And she's trying to defend herself and reach back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's set up beautifully by the scene where the neighbor was pecked to death.
Yeah.
Right. So we realize there are real stakes here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if she can't get these birds off of her, they will
Yeah.
take her eyes out.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that's what
Well,
happened to
and then once she kind of falls to the ground, and the others have heard her screaming, they can't open the door because now she's lying in front of it. And so
Yes.
they literally have to shove the door hard enough to move her out of the way, which has to hurt. But it's like this is the only way to try to get her out. And so like that whole sequence is just really intense. But there's one little bit of acting from her that's actually after the sequence, but I just has always stood out to me, and I really like it. And it's when, like, she has basically been catatonic since that happened.
Right.
Like but then when they're trying to say, okay, we're going to try to drive out of here, we have to get her to the car. So she's more or less walking, like they're guiding her, but she's on her feet. But she's kind of just been staring into space. But then when she sees all the birds outside and she starts kind of coming around, and she's just, no, no. But they're having to quiet her because they're worried she's going to make the birds start to attack again. But just like that little bit has always just really like stuck with me. That I really like her performance in that. I mean, it's a tiny moment, but sometimes that's what works in movies.
It's true.
Yeah. All right, cool. Uh, what else? Anything else?
No, we're
All
good
right.
on these. These were good.
Cool, cool. So, yes, um, uh, good movies. So, what shall we talk about next? I know that we had offline discussed possibility of perhaps some video game movies.
Yes. And so the ones I suggested, I don't think they are definitive video game movies by any
Mm-hmm.
means. That wasn't the point.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the interesting fact that there are some video game movies with a legacy movie and then a reboot movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just comparing kind of the contrast between the two and all of that.
Yeah.
So the two that kind of stuck with me have always been Mortal Kombat because I've always really enjoyed the first movie.
It's a lot of fun. It is.
It's so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the reboot, I'm using reboot even though they have not like
Yeah.
expanded the franchise. The remake or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, like I really enjoyed that
Yeah.
too for different reasons. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was so much fun. And I was thinking, okay, what else was like that? And I feel like Tomb Raider might have kind of been like that.
Yeah.
Because the first one was so silly and so fun because it was like really just playing into the fact that it's a
Mm-hmm.
video game, it's Angelina Jolie,
Yeah.
and then they did the reboot or remake or
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Well,
however many years ago, and it was treated a little more seriously,
well,
but like it was also a good movie.
but it was also like following the arc in the game, right? Because like the original movie was made like the Tomb Raider games that had come out at that point, but then the Tomb Raider games themselves had been rebooted since then and had come out, and were the newer ones were in a different style, and the new movie was more like that.
Yes.
So I think that's an interesting quartet of movies to talk about, specifically in the context between the original and the remake.
That's what kind of got me. So I was interested in doing that,
Hmm.
and then it also puts into our bank of movies to choose from, like
Hmm.
other video game movies in the
Yeah.
future. Like
Like
you
yeah,
mentioned,
I had tossed out a few, like Uncharted, for example, is a based on a video game. I think that movie's fun, but also it's not necessarily. I don't know that there's a ton to talk about about it, but you could also just do movies that like are about video games. Like what about like Tron, or then like Ready Player One?
yep,
Yeah.
yep,
But I think maybe for next time, let's keep it to Mortal Kombat, old and new, Tomb Raider, old and new.
yes, and sequels are a bonus, but it's not the point of what we're watching.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to watch any of the Mortal Kombat movies besides the two that we're doing specifically.
I don't have any intention of that either. Um, I had some consideration of watching the second or of the original Tomb Raiders, because I remember it being so over the top that it almost like took the energy out of the first one.
Yeah, well,
And I don't, but I also don't want to watch it for that
mhm.
reason because like
it
I like
yeah, it felt clumsy compared to the first one. Like the first one is cheesy as hell. It's kind of schlocky, but it's got like a real sort of juice to it though.
yeah.
Like the music's great, the fight sequences are great, and there's just some real silly stuff in there. But then the second one just felt like it kind of just went bananas without having any of the same
It's not
love
grounded.
of that first stuff. Not like the first one's not grounded, but the second one kind of loses all tether.
The first one's grounded in the well, we can discuss it when
Yeah,
we watch
yeah. We'll discuss it when we watch
because
it.
we're remembering things that we watched 10, 15
Yes,
years ago.
yes.
Yeah. How we
So
felt then. Yeah.
so Tomb Raider old and new, Mortal Kombat old and new, and we will be back. So in the meantime, between now and then, watch good movies.
Watch good movies.